It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means. It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Yeah, baby. And here we go. Yep, there we go. Welcome, you guys. And thank you, band. Thank you, fake audience, clappers. So how many of you guys, I see you all in the chat room, how many of you guys watched the Beatles 50th anniversary thing last night? I don't know who wrote that. Hear mixes in stereo. Yeah, that's a problem, but I'll tell you later. Anyway, what did I just see? Who wrote the intro music? It comes off of this device, which I bought at a Toys R Us after many hours of research. Oops, my piece of paper that's blocking the sun just fell off the shades. I don't know who wrote that. I don't know that. I have no idea. There you go. Amanda, you're buffering already. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so how many of you guys watched the Beatle thing last night? Anybody? Nobody's answering. Delay. Anyway. All right, well, I'm going to keep cranking away then, so I don't, for people that watch the archives later, I don't want to look like a fool sitting here going, waiting for an answer. Yeah, I got to say, some of the stuff is really good, some of it not so good. Always great to see Paul, even better to see Paul and Ringo. I've got to say, I've seen Ringo, I think twice now with the Ringo All-Star Band, and he's quite a showman, I got to say, a lot of personality. So today we're going to do How's Your Mix? And I've got about 14, exactly 14 songs to listen to. I recently got a couple emails from people that said, try and listen to more music per episode. It's tough because I don't want to just like play it for 30 seconds and then move on. But I will try and go faster today and get more stuff played. So there you go. And with that in mind, let's listen to the first song. Let me get the thing fired up. The reason I don't play it in stereo off of the Ustream software or player itself is it seems like the times that we use Ustream that it creates memory issues and we get bumped offline, blah, blah, blah. So it just works better playing it off the CD through the speakers. And also sounds better for me. And if I were to play it through Ustream and play it through the speakers here, I would have to wear headphones so I don't get feedback. So all kinds of little complications. So this just works better. What can I say? So the first song is called No Red Lights, and as is normal, I'm not going to mention the members or viewers' names. Everybody, you know the rules. Be nice, be constructive if you have comments. And the person who sent in No Red Lights says, hello, I want to know if this mix is broadcast quality and what improvements can I make. Thank you for your time. You are so welcome. So without any further ado, let's have a listen to No Red Lights, which should be coming up here momentarily.
We on the night. These are the moments we'll remember for life. Come right with me tonight. All I
those. It's interesting. Yes, we're going to talk mostly about the mix. I may throw a song comment out there.
Flying through the stoplight, slave to the moonlight. We on the light. These are the moments we'll remember for life. Come ride with me tonight. I don't see no red light. All I see is green. Go. I don't see no red light. All I see is green. Go. I don't see no red light. All I see is green in the fast lane. Living life at top speed. We live life at top speed. Living life at top speed. I don't see no red light. All I see is green in the fast lane. Living life at top speed.
All right. I will turn up the audio level a little bit because I could see it was a little bit low on my meter on this end. Okay. These are the notes I scribbled down. Hopefully I can read them because my writing is much like a doctor's. I made a note that the vocal was a little bit low, and I saw that several of you commented on that. It sounded just a little bit harsh, not horribly so, but sounded like there was a lot of like 3.5 to 5K going on in there. Oh, look, a piece of paper fell off. There's the sunlight. Yay. It just sounded, the bottom was a little bit shy on it. It wasn't what I would call a cohesive mix. It wasn't bad. It just wasn't great. So, and some of that was production as well. And I started noticing things arrangement-wise that I would have changed, but I kept saying, don't pay attention to that. Listen to the mix. That's what he wants to know about. So it didn't sound like the samples were all that contemporary sounding. I really liked the little arpeggios that were bouncing back and forth between the left and the right side. I think you could have done some more interesting stuff with the vocal, other than just the auto tune, maybe some delay, maybe a looping delay on the vocal in certain parts. Probably could have used a touch of reverb on the lead vocal. It needed a drop. It didn't have a drop, and because it was kind of a dance pop electro sounding thing, I think you could have made the overall mix sound a little more fierce and a little more intense, give it more gravitas by adding more bottom end to it, maybe layering the bass, going for 2 or 3 complementary bass sounds to give it a firmer bottom end. The bottom end did have a certain amount of cohesiveness with the kick drum, but I think if you'd beefed up both and really worked more on the marriage of the two, it would have made it sound a lot cooler. It could have used background vocals. It did have the sampled backgrounds in there, but they were pads, not really background vocals. And that's a production thing, but I think it could have used some. And then after you do all that other stuff that I talked about, I think it could have used overall compression to make it sound more cohesive with other stuff that's in that same genre that would be played in clubs. That it just didn't sound all that slick or professional, and that if you added some compression to the mix bus, it would have made it sound a little bit more like other stuff in that genre. So All right, I'm trying to see what you guys thought. It's a good track, but again, it sounded tiny and thin. Um, Needs more work, but a wee bit catchy. I agree. There was something a little catchy about it. Um, Again, I'm trying so hard to stay away from production stuff, but the vocal could have been sung a little more emphatically. I wasn't paying that much attention to the lyrics because the vocal didn't suck me in enough to cause me to pay more attention. Samples don't sound contemporary. Bronstein wants to know what that means. I hear this comment, not clear what that means without knowing every sound from the past. You would almost have to know every sound that's current. Not every sound. Nobody could know every sound. And I'm certainly not a whiz at samples. I don't do any engineering or production anymore, so I don't use them. But it sounded, and I don't mean to berate the Casio Corporation or their products, but it sounded, remember the old little Casio keyboard that was about 14, 16 inches big? The samples sounded like they were from the 80s. They didn't sound like really cool sounds that producers of this kind of music would do today. And, typically they don't often use the stuff, the presets right out of the box. I know Shirelli has mentioned on the show to use the presets because somebody worked hard to come up with those presets. I would say use those presets as a starting point and then doctor them up. Now, you could doctor them up by just layering them. I don't know that I would go in and I personally don't have the skill set to sit there and look at a preset and then go in and edit it or amend it. But you could certainly layer. Let me go back a little bit and play a sound.
We on the night. These are the moments we'll remember for life. Come out with me tonight.
Like the snare sound. I've never heard one quite like it, frankly. And it's not horrible, but it doesn't sound great. So I know that producers I know will sit there and spend 3 hours going through all these different snare sounds, and then they find one that they like, and then they might add a second or a third snare, and just bring them in, just feather them into the primary snare to give it more guts, more balls. Let's listen. See what else. Piano doesn't sound great. Doesn't sound horrible, but it doesn't sound great. There's a different snare. I would give that snare reverb. It needs like a 2-second decay on reverb on that snare. That would make it more interesting. And definitely layering stuff, unless you are very, very comfortable with EQ, you could cause more harm, I think, than good playing around with the EQ. Then again, if you're fairly adept at using EQ, yeah, you could take something that sounds like a really, sawtoothy, edgy sound, but maybe make it fatter by adding some bottom end. But you might accomplish that same goal by just adding another sound in with it. The synth needs to be thicker. Yes, I agree. Okay, so that's the first one. Thank you for sending that in. And now we're going to move on to a song called You Make Me Beautiful. And the person who submitted it says, I'd love your analysis of the mix. I'd like your specific advice on the balance that I strike between guitars, drums, and vocals, especially during and right after the bridge. Okay, let's have a listen. And this again is called You Make Me Beautiful.
Sunrise on legs when you walk into the
One thing I want to point out right now is the EQ on the vocal is really, really close to being like way too bright. It's pretty close to being sibilant. It's a little sibilant. It's right on the border of like making your ears. Yes, the Casio VL tone. Um, yeah, it's just a little bright on the vocals.
You're a gem hard to find. I'm rich beyond measure with you by my side. You're a warm summer shower of love and of grace, like the sun to the moon. Your light shines off my face, 'cause you make me you.
Okay, acoustic guitars should come up. They're a little boomy and not very well defined on the top end. I think they're doubled. I would take those acoustic guitars and pan them to like 9 and 3 and compress them a little bit. They may already be compressed, but they're just like a little tubby and a little overly round and not very defined. Yet they would contribute a lot more to the rhythmic aspect of the song if they were compressed a little, had just a little more. It's rare that you're going to hear me say this, but because usually you want to roll off some low mids on an acoustic guitar, but this almost sounds like it might need some like upper low mids, like something around 1,000 hertz, just a tad, like 1 or 2 dB, just to get a little bit more of the pick hitting the string. I'm afraid to say go with like 5K or 6K, which would make it possibly overly bright, and that combined with the bright vocal might make your ears want to bleed. Also, I don't hear yet a regular drum kit in here, and I want to spend a little time listening to the drums. Like that when it comes out of the bridge, and the bridge is kind of interesting. I like when it comes out of the bridge and the vocals are really pretty. It almost sounds a little too dead, and like things are recorded in different dead spaces. There's not a cohesive overall sound to it. It's a little bit Celtic sounding, and I think that the drum almost sounds like I can hear a kick drum in there, and I kind of like the kick drum, but I would give it a little bit more attack and put a little bit of room reverb on it to make it sound like it was done in a 20-foot by 30-foot room maybe. And almost, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like one of those Irish hand drums, that are like 2 or 3 inches deep and maybe 16 inches around, that are played like this. Sometimes they're played with like little sticky things, I think. I'm trying to catch up with your comments. I hear better with ice cream. Something is louder than it should be. I agree. There is a kick drum in there. Listen, but the kick drum just gets swallowed. Hear that? I know this doesn't help you guys, certainly doesn't help the person who sent me this song, but I would really love to have this and be able to go track by track and kind of remix it. Sometimes it's tough when you hear a full finished mix and you have to identify, overall what's not working. And again, this isn't terrible. It sounds kind of okay, but it doesn't sound great. And we want your stuff to sound great. Um, Amanda, who's Irish, says it has the, how do you pronounce that? Bodhran rhythm? Bodhran, which is the Irish drum that I mentioned before. Um, ah, Joey's laying claim. uh, yeah, it's he says the producer of the Lumineers, Ryan Haddock, wants to produce this for me. Man, I'd take him up on that. Um, it's the song is kind of cool, and you know what? Done really well. Let's say that the song is like at 70% of its potential now, as far as the engineering and production. Imagine now this being in a commercial.
Beauty starts in the part, let it show what you grow. Beauty starts in the part, let it show what you grow. Beauty starts in the part, let it show.
I'm gonna try and find the bridge again. No. Love the vocals. I want the percussion to hit me more in the chest. If you can accomplish that, it's either going to be through EQ, compression, or just adjusting the levels. It's going to make the whole thing just have more impact and make it much more commercially viable. Um, I'm looking to see if anybody else has anything worth adding. What is that drum, Joey? The one that sounds like a bodhran, or however I'm mispronouncing that. I'm curious, was that a real drum that you mic'd, or was that a sample that was played? I'm waiting. Bubbles says uh, makes you want to sway back and forth with a pint of beer. It does, and it could. I wanted to do more of that. Joey says, "Yeah, that drum was something in Logic. I have no clue." Well, I'd go back into Logic and listen to that thing and try and just make it. I remember back in the day when I would record conga drums that I would use a 57 microphone on a conga because you really got the like sandpapery texture of the skin against the fingers with just a regular old Shure 57. I'm looking for that same texture out of this drum, and then I would compress it and make it louder, and then close mic the acoustics and compress those and just make this kind of wall of sound of percussion because the vocals are pretty happening, and it needs a more percussive underlayment, for lack of a better word. All right, so there you go. I hope that was helpful. Trying to move along here, moving on to song number 3, and I'm not making great time. It's tough to just rattle off a 1 minute commentary on a song when it comes to almost anything for me. All right, this is song number 3 called Living Dead. I'm specifically interested in knowing what's the best way to make sure a mix sounds great on every possible sound system, including computers and laptops. That's tough because whenever I get a song mixed or mastered, they always sound different on different systems. Of course they do. So I'm never sure that the song will sound best in whatever system it ends up being played. I can tell you without even listening to your song that the solution to that is there is no solution. It's really, really hard. You can take, something that's a big charting hit right now. If I were to listen to it on my MacBook Pro through the internal speakers, come on, they're the size of a quarter. There's no bottom end in there. Obviously, that's going to affect the EQ curve because there is no bottom end. It's going to be very mid-rangey and top-endy sounding. If you listen on headphones, you're going to get a different result because of the proximity of the transducer to your eardrums. If you listen to it on a pair of NS10s, like the one sitting behind me, you're going to get something that's going to sound a little bit more like a control room in a studio, obviously depending on the room you're listening to it. I know that all good mixers will check their mixes on 2 or 3 reference monitors that they trust. Back in my day, we used these little speakers called Oratones, and I'm looking around to see if I've got anything Oratone size. And yes, I actually do. An Oratone, the front of an Oratone was roughly the size of a jewel case, like 4 inches by 4 inches with, I think about, maybe it's 5 inches by 5 inches. It just had one little speaker in there. There was no woofer and tweeter or mid-range. And we would mix typically on JBL 4311s, maybe check stuff on the big monitors, although the big monitors were basically made to push a lot of air and get everybody in the control room excited as their shirts were flapping against their chests and blowing out their eardrums in the process. So primarily we mixed on monitors about the size of the NS10s or a little bigger, mounted on the meter bridge, probably about 4 feet away from our ears. And then we would check on the Oratones, which I called the horror tones, because they weren't great sounding, but if you listen to the Oratones at really low volume and listen carefully without people talking and everything, making noise in the back of the control room, you could hear once you know those monitors, you could hear if there was enough top, bottom, and middle in the mix. At some point in my career, I used to broadcast on I had like a little miniature FM chip. It was a thing about the size of an ice cube. And you could broadcast at a certain frequency. And I would go listen. At the time, I had a little Triumph Spitfire with a mono FM radio in it. And I would broadcast to my car in the parking lot and go listen to that. That used to be the standard. How did things sound in the car? How did things sound being broadcast even more so? Because radio stations squish things with tons of compression. So there is no perfect answer other than if you mix a lot and mix for many years, the 10,000 hour rule, eventually you come to learn what it is that is going to make something sound pretty good on several things, but you're never going to make a laptop or earbuds or NS10s all sound the same. So get to know what your primary monitors are and how they translate to other things. And think about this. What is most of your audience going to be listening on? If it's a 15-year-old person listening, they're going to be listening on earbuds most likely or right out of the back of their iPhone. It's going to sound like crap, and it's probably going to be in mono. My kids have been known to listen to stuff with just one earbud in, which causes me great consternation. If it's a 38-year-old female in her car, as Ralph Murphy always talks about, your audience is a 30-something woman on her way to work during rush hour. She's listening on a decent-sounding car radio. So maybe that's the way to mix your song if your song appeals to that demographic. If your song is classic rock that might appeal to a 45 to 65-year-old demographic, what are those people going to be listening on? Car radios, and probably a Marantz stereo at home left over from the 70s, which probably sounds pretty darn good these days. Have you been to an electronics store and tried to find a regular stereo lately? No, everything is 5.1 surround and subwoofers, and I couldn't even begin to tell you how to mix on that stuff. So let's keep listening. Oh, yeah. Or let's start listening. This is Living Dead.
I was dead before I even hit the ground. Then I
I like this. I love the vocalist, the sound and texture of her vocal. Somebody used the word alluring, and I agree. I really like the sound of the vocal. But there's something going on with the mid range. There's like this wall of sound that's kind of a wash and a collision in the mid range on this. And I think that some of it is the arrangement. Maybe instead of the guitars and the piano, everything being played like in a middle octave, what if, you had an acoustic guitar on one side that was capoed and another one that was lower on the other side, and maybe roll off some of the mid range in the acoustics, and then on the electric guitar, which I think there are a couple of electric guitars in there, and they're almost bell-like in their EQ curve. And I don't mean, well, I guess I do mean, there's a bell curve in the EQ, very, very mid-rangey. But the effect that you get, because there's a lot of sustain and they're very just bell-like. If you went out in the room and listened to the amp, they would sound a little bell-like. Well, they're a little too bell-like, and there's too much of them. And the piano, let's listen and see if we can hear the piano.
No other choice but to walk with the living.
Let's go back to the top.
I was dead before I even hit the ground. Then I came back and started to live. I was born to be different, no other choice but to walk with the living dead. If you think that my company drains your heart, no one's pointing a gun to your head. Take a walk on the wild side away from me. I'll just
I'm a fan of using a lot of whole note stuff, open chords and whole notes, and letting songs and arrangements have some air, give them room to breathe. But this has many things doing whole notes, and they're just creating this wash of mid-range. And it sounds like the engineer really had to work to make the vocal have its own place in the EQ spectrum. And there's a ton of compression on it, which I think actually kind of works well for this vocal. But if the parts were arranged differently, where some of the stuff are half notes or quarter notes and some are whole notes, that you would hear things dancing around rather than just this wow, wow, wow. I would be a little more respectful of having some things that are quarter notes, some that are half notes, some that are little arpeggios, where the parts are dancing around and giving each other room to breathe rather than just so wall of sound. It's not really working. And I've got to say, I am actually a fan of big whole note stuff, but there's just too much of it in here. So I hope that makes sense. J. Joe Howery said, I was trying to say that I'd love to see her framed and showcased and not so crowded by the music. Yes, I agree. All right. There you go. So I hope that was helpful. And now let's move on to number 4, which is called Space and Time. And Space and Time, the person who submitted that says, I have a huge mix I've been working on for a while and would love to hear. I have a huge mix. Okay, huge mix. I've been working on it for a while. Would love to hear your comments on it in general. The only thing I'm not 100% sure on is the bass levels and vocals. At first they lacked some power. I couldn't figure out how to get them out there. Eventually I tried adding a double track and applied distortion, and now they seem better. So circling that, bass levels and vocals. Maybe it's just better because it made my voice sound different. I like them now. Love to know what you think. Okay, let's have a listen to Space and Time.
Used to
pausing it there. That keyboard thing is just so overpowering the vocal, so overpowering the bass, so overpowering the drums. That thing needs to come down, and it may actually be so busy that it just overwhelms everything. So let's pay attention to that as we move on. Again, I think it's more of an arrangement issue. I would start with the arrangement. It's hard to even comment about the mix because the arrangement is just so overpowering that the vocal gets lost in there. And then when the guitar comes in, the big sustained guitar, it just adds yet another layer of all this mid-range stuff. I would take this track, and it's going to be tough because you're used to hearing it the way it is, and you've probably listened to it like hundreds of times, but strip it down. And it's funny, recently, I can't remember if it was somebody I had on the show or if it's something I read somewhere, I don't remember, but I almost always started my mixes with, I would start with the kick drum. And, you know, at the time I knew my console, knew my room, and knew everything like the back of my hand. So I knew that if I started with a kick drum and it showed up, you know, like at a -5 on the 2-mix out, on the mix bus meters, that okay, that's a good place for that to be, depending if it was a ballad and a poofy kick drum or if it was a rock thing with the kick drum that had more attack. But you learn over time. But on average, I would say that generally my kick drums were somewhere around -5 on a VU setting. So I would get the sound I liked and get that level dialed in, and then add the bass to it, and then tweak the relationship between the bass guitar and the kick drum so that they sounded like they were a married unit and there was a nice firm bottom end. Then bring in the snare drum and the hi-hat and get all that stuff balanced out. Then I would probably, if it were an acoustic song, bring up the 2 acoustic guitars without any EQ or any compression at first, and bring those up and pan them fairly wide. And so now you've got this nice airy mix with a nice firm punchy bottom. And then I would probably bring up the vocal just as a test, not as a final mix element, but bring up the vocal and see how that sat in with everything else. Then mute the vocal and then start adding other elements like a keyboard, a piano, a lead guitar if it had one, maybe an electric rhythm guitar, and add all that stuff judiciously and then bring the vocal back in. And does the vocal still sit well in there? So a lot of times it really comes down to less is more. And just because you've recorded all the parts doesn't mean that you have to use them all the way through the song in the whole mix. You would, I would think, would want to have a different complement of instruments in the intro than you would in the first verse, and then probably more instruments with more balls in the chorus. But then you're going to have to adjust the vocal so that it doesn't get swallowed by adding in those extra instruments. Then, when you've added those extra instruments and the vocal, now are your mix meters being pegged because you've brought the level up that much more. So these are all things that you learn by doing. There really isn't an article you can read or a video you can watch that's going to get you to the point where you're a great mixer like that. It happens over time. So I'm trying to give you overall tips. Let's listen to a little bit more, see if I have any final thoughts. It's just a wash of stuff, and it's hard to identify any one thing. Somebody asked, should you mix it low volume? I think everybody who's a professional mixer would tell you yes. I know that it's hard for me personally to mix it low volume. I like feeling a little thump in my chest when I'm doing it. But there's a thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve. The louder things are, the more top end you're going to hear. The more bottom end you're going to hear. So mixing it at a low level is kind of like using the Auratone speakers. Using little Auratone speakers at a fairly low level really makes you work hard. You have to shut your eyes and listen and think about all these things. Is there enough bass? Is there enough kick? Is there enough of this, enough of that? It's a good thing to do. But if you've been mixing for 4 hours at a fairly loud level on a pair of NS10s, and then you switch to the Auratones, your ears are going to be a little shut down, and it's going to be hard to get an accurate read off the small speakers. So sometimes it's good to mix on the NS10s or whatever your mid-sized, meter bridge mounted monitors are. And then go out to dinner and take a break and come back. And rather than listening to the mix on those mid-sized monitors or big monitors, after you finish dinner or come back in the next day, start out listening to the Auratones at a low level. Okay, so I hope that helps. Okay, moving on to song number 5, which is called Beat the House Down, Electronic Dance Instrumental. And the person who submitted that says it's an EDM instrumental track submission for tonight's Taxi TV. Thank you. Just want to know if the mix is suitable and appropriate for the electronic dance genre. Mainly interested in a critique of the drums. Let's find out. And this is called Beat the House Down. You can already tell there's a pretty good relationship of the kick drum and the bass. Good example of how well thought out parts in the arrangement wise, makes it easier to hear everything in the mix. All right, throwing a little applause on that one. Overall, I think that one's maybe the closest we've heard so far. It was obviously an instrumental track, no vocal in it. Like the bottom end, like the kick drum sound, like the balance of the track overall. The main keyboard was maybe a pinch loud, although it's really kind of carrying the melody. I personally would have worked harder to find a sound that is in that ballpark, but even cooler sounding. I'm not an expert on sample libraries or synthesizers by any stretch of the imagination. So I couldn't recommend a library or a sound for you, but that was the only thing that really stuck out to me is that sound was just a tad loud, and I just didn't love it. Didn't hate it though either. How'd you guys feel about it? People tended to like it. Good. All right. Waddy JP says, sound a bit over compressed, but could be how we're listening. And plus compression is pretty standard in the EDM market. All right. So good job on that one. Thank you. And now we're going to hear a song called All I Wanted, which is number 6. And overall sound of the mix balance, is there too much sax? Are the vocals loud enough? Let's find out. Spaghetti Western guitar. Got to stop it there. Started out really good. A good example of a fairly open arrangement. You could hear all the pieces. The saxophone reminded me of Jerry Rafferty from Steelers Wheel, and then his solo career. You don't hear a lot of saxophones today. Not saying that's a good thing or bad thing, just an observation. But when the vocal came in, I think you specifically asked, is the sax too loud, and are the vocals loud enough? So far, vocals are not loud enough.
Stuck on the splashing road to take a rest. Even though you gave your heart away for something that I got to say, it's best to get these little words off my chest. I miss your kiss, I miss your touch. I think I miss loving you too much, and dreaming what my life would be with you. I miss your heart, I miss your style, I miss your crazy little smile that swept me off my feet. I think you knew all I wanted was a chance to love you too. I'm colored by emotions that no reason would wipe out. So deep into the strata of my soul.
Track sounds pretty good, the blend on the track.
Resistance when love took a hold on my heart. I fell in love and I fell out of control. I miss your kiss, I miss your touch. I think I miss loving you too much, and dreaming what my life would be with you.
Very good, Audio Painter says Terry Jacks. I agree.
I miss your style, I miss your crazy little smile that swept me off my feet. I think you knew all
All right. This one's got a lot of good aspects to it. I was sitting there, I kept drifting off into what genre is it? It sounds very, what, mid to late 70s? Somebody said Terry Jacks. What was the hit that Terry Jacks had? Um, Guitar in the back is great. The dink dink dink. Yep, I like that. There were a lot of cool elements to that, but I kept thinking, what genre is this? It didn't sound all that contemporary, but that's not the point of today's show. So overall, I would say that the sounds were there. Somebody remarked that it sounded a little dark, and I don't think they meant dark like, dark like evil. It just, it it didn't glisten anywhere in the mix. There wasn't a lot of top end air that could have been there on some stuff. I mean, it sounded pretty darn good. It would sound even better if there was just a little bit of top end air, some 8 or 10K on some of the stuff. Let's see, what instruments? Year of the Cat, yeah, a little bit of Al Stewart in there. Like that sound, that's cool. There actually is a good hi-hat sound.
Had another restless night, something about this dream.
And yeah, the vocal is just too low. I don't know if you mixed this yourself, and if you're the vocalist, it sounds to me like you are the vocalist and you did mix it yourself and you're not feeling all that confident about your vocal, so therefore you mixed it a little too far down in the mix. Just my observation, so I hope that helps. Okay. Now we're moving on to a song called Make Believe. Please tell me if you think the fake drums kill the song. Let's hear those fake drums.
Maybe I do, and then again, maybe I don't. Maybe I will, and then again, maybe I won't. If you don't like what you see, I can change the view. You think you know the real me, but you don't have a clue. I'm playing make-believe, where reality is up to me. I'm playing make-believe. I wanna take your path. I way down deep inside, I am only me. If you caught a glimpse, would you still love me? They say that only truth will ever set me free from this ball and chain, this game of make-believe. I'm playing make-believe.
Okay. The drums actually aren't terrible. For being canned drums, they don't sound, like stiff little MIDI drums. The whole mix sounded very mid-rangey. Again, just a lot of mid-rangey instruments going on at the same time, and all of a sudden you get this thing that makes you feel like your ears are going to start bleeding. Very cool composition. The frums are a little dry. I think Gregory meant the drums. Yeah, the guitar, vocal, and organ all at once, a little crowded, sounds cluttered. Yep, back to what I was saying about the arrangement. So much of mixing has to do with the arrangement and paying attention to things like the octave certain things are played in. Give everything should have its own space in the aural spectrum. Not only as far as, like the landscape, if you shut your eyes and try and see where the instruments are, but in the frequency ranges they occupy. And there you go. A couple people have said sounds a little bit like Amy Mann or Missing Persons. I agree. Yeah, but overall, not so bad. Definitely heading in a good direction. But I would go back and look at the arrangement, and do you need all those mid-rangey instruments showing up at the same time? Somebody asked earlier, does the brand of EQ, compressor, or reverb matter? Some people would say yes, some people would say no. I would say you've got to be a fairly sophisticated user in the first place to hear the difference. Yeah, you can buy, and are we talking about stuff that's in the box or out of the box? When I say in the box, I mean plugins. I know that Multiverb is very popular. As far as EQ goes, that's a matter of personal taste. You want stuff personally. I like stuff that sounds like old Neve EQ. I used to love actual old Pultec EQs on acoustic guitars, vocals, and bass. Compressors, it so much depends on what you're compressing. Is it a lead guitar part with long legato phrases? Are you compressing a snare drum? Are you compressing chink chinks on a Strat? Are you compressing a lead vocal? Different compressors at different settings work better for different things. So you can't just say, oh yes, go buy this brand of compressor and everything is going to sound great. Okay. All right. Now we're going to listen to a song called Take Me Over. Do you feel that the vocal is sitting in the mix appropriately, or is it overshadowing the instrumentation? Let's have a listen to Take Me Over.
There was a fire in your eyes, something I wanted to say. I'm only thinking of you 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day. Did what we could to get by. See just how far it would go. We understood when we started. I hope that someday we'll know. You know your mind, so take me over. Not gonna put up a fight. You know your mind, so take me over. This love just feels so right. This love just feels so right. Girl, you're exactly so right. Although I love what I see, because I know on the inside, when you lost, you turned to me. When you lost, you turned to me. You know your mind, so take
Listen to
me
guitar.
over. Not gonna
Sorry for the pause. Everybody's getting into this one. Really good job so far. But listen, you can hear the acoustic guitar, you can hear the reverb repeats on whatever it was that was repeating. Everything's got its own space arrangement wise, so it just sounds so well balanced. Yeah. I thought that was really, really well done. I think that is a great example of what I've been talking about during the entire show, which is give everything some space in the arrangement, and all of a sudden everything sounds better. You could hear the acoustic guitars, you could hear the keyboard, you could hear the delay repeats. Just everything was in there. The kick drum sounded great, the bass sounded great. Dynamics at the end, yeah, getting a lot of plus ones. I didn't even ask you guys to give plus ones or minus ones, but everybody seemed to like that one. So really good job. I know whose song it was, and I have a feeling the person is out of the room at the moment, but excellent job. You know who you are, and you should be proud of that. Really, really good. Almost had a little bit of a Renaissance vibe going on. I expected Princess to ride in side saddle on her horse with one of those pointy little hats with a little scarf thing dangling down from it. Kind of a cool vibe. All right, now we're moving on to number 9, called She's Gone Away, and the songs from here on out are songs that Aaron gave me that didn't have specific questions. So let's have a listen to number 9, which is called She's Gone Away.
She's gone away, and I just can't seem to find her. She's gone away. Is she lost among the fallen flowers in forgotten fields?
Yep, squeaky chair.
When she dreams, does she dream of happy times? Such a long, long time ago. When we meet again, I will carry her safely home. Come back, come home, come back, come home. She's gone away. She's gone away.
Beautiful. Not a lot of elements to really mix in that. You know, certainly not a typical pop or rock song or dance track. I'm not a new age expert, but yeah, somebody said Lorena McKenna, and it does remind me of stuff from her that I've heard. Just beautiful, beautiful texture on the vocal, and pitch perfect. You never know these days if that's electronic or for real, but I have a feeling in this vocalist case, probably real. I really don't have any suggestions for that one. Let's play Stump the Squeaky Chair Guy. You guys seem to like it. Yeah, the vocals sounded pretty clear in the room here with me. Siraj is crying. Oh. Yeah, just beautiful. There's something you don't hear every day. All right, so a good job on that one. Now we're moving on to a song called Super Nice Time Galore. There's an interesting title. Let's have a listen to Super Nice Time Galore. And again, this is another one where we didn't have a specific question from the person who submitted it. Yeah. I hear a woodpecker. I don't know. I like that piece. Compositionally, I thought it was great. I thought the mix was pretty well balanced. Am I nuts? I mean, I think that was a guitar sample and not a real guitar. I think compositionally it was so cool that this could be like a really killer piece if that were a real guitar played by a real player. Of course, now the person's going to chime in and say, "That was you, idiot." I don't know. You guys seem to like it. Uh, yeah, it would be. It had a very cinematic quality to it. You know, somebody getting in a little boat in turquoise water, and, you know, pushing it out from the beach and going out on some little adventure. There's something like, you know, a wistful, adventurous feel to it. Um, I see this as a spine for a fuller song. Um, yeah, programmed rather than real, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I liked it, but again, a real guitar, and there was one other sample in there that I didn't love. I can't remember what it was, but overall, the composition was just so unique and so cool that I was totally sucked into it and really wasn't hearing anything about the mix that was horribly wrong. Just some of the samples, you know, some libraries would kick it out and say, nope, won't have it because of the samples. So why not get somebody with a real guitar to play it? Easier said than done, maybe. I don't know. Maybe this person, you know, lives in a remote place and doesn't have a guitar player friend. Could always have somebody overdub it and send it down a wire to you. Um, yep, number one or +1 for mix and arrangement. I agree with Mike on that one. All right, good job. Super nice time galore. I like it. The next one, I like the title. I think it's called Indecisive Master. I think it's really called Indecisive, and they were designating that this is the master. And when I looked at it a few minutes ago, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie 12 Years a Slave yet, but wow, really, really good. Go see that one. Okay, so we're going to listen to Indecisive. I know nothing about it or what this person wanted to know, but let's have a listen.
Whenever I start feeling low down, I just start thinking of a girl like you. You're so kind-hearted and you're so sincere. Spending time with you makes it very clear. It's you and me, nobody else. You'll be better than I know myself. A pretty face, funny face. I love to watch you walk my way. You got all that and much, much more. In your beauty, you go to the core. It isn't either, it ain't or. In your beauty, it keeps me coming back for more.
Okay, do-do-do-do-do-do. That little part, bad sound. That's the kind of stuff when screeners say, you know, loved it compositionally, but some of the samples sucked. That was a sound that hurt this. It didn't help it. And the track is kind of cool. It's very Motown-esque. I'm going to take it back a little bit and let's listen.
It isn't either, it ain't or. In your beauty, it keeps me coming back for
Yeah,
more.
the bass is a little low. That part.
We started out to be just friends, hanging out and cruising on weekends. We had a bright smile and a captive charm. Now we're locked up in each other's arms. You're living proof, dreams come true. I wouldn't trade $1 million for you. A pretty face, brilliant mind. Really like yours is so hard much, much more. And your beauty, according to the core. It isn't either, it ain't all. And your beauty is what you've been put here for. How fast cars every morning you could be a star. But it's not the final close away because beauty's always giving. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You got all that and much, much more. And your beauty, according to the core. It isn't either.
Awesome song. Love the song, love the Motown feel, love the groove. It sits in a nice pocket. I mean, you can tell it's all the parts are out of a box. Boy, if this were done with, a lot more real instruments, this would be so awesome. It's a little mid-rangey. And I think that's largely a result of some of the synthesized or sampled stuff. But overall, just really, really cool. And whoever you are who sent that in, man, find, whenever you can, get some real instruments in there, because that song itself, and I like your vocal, if that's you singing, it just has the potential to be great. Somebody said get some real horns. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement on most of that stuff. Okay, moving on to number 13. And this one is called Do Ya Thing.
Listen, boys and girls, there's something you should know. What's the time? Gotta go online and do the thing makes you shine. Must come down, just trying to hit and make your sound. Do your thing, come on baby now, do your thing.
It's got a pretty good relationship between the bass and the kick. It is unbalanced. It's what we call not cohesive. Mike Moriello says garage band feel as in a real garage. It does. I like that about it. It feels very authentic. The snare sounds sad and wounded. I'm a little stunned. I don't know exactly what to say. There's something to be said for the recording and mix of that song sound amazingly appropriate for what it is, although I wouldn't say it was a great mix. It does sound like a band recording them, their rehearsal in a basement. There's nothing polished about it. I'm afraid that if you did polish it too much, and gave it like a nice sheen, that it would take away from a lot of the authenticity. I'll bet you that there would be a music supervisor or two that would use that in its existing form for the right scene in the right TV show or movie, but it's not going to have a lot of wide appeal. Excuse me, there's the weekly rock star burp right there. Um, yeah, the drum sounded like it had one mic on it. I'm kind of a fan of that personally. Yeah, I wouldn't polish it too much. There was something pretty darn cool about that for what it was. I think it was, yeah, kind of White Stripes, yeah. Um, you know, I only remember ever working on one record that was like that, and I can't remember the name of the band, but we ended up doing the whole record with the band live. We tried so hard to record a 24 track, and we got through about 3 songs, and I just kept going, it's not working, you guys. So in the end, I just had, we threw some 4x8 sheets of plywood up around the room, and took the drums out of the drum booth and had the whole band play literally like they were doing a basement rehearsal, and just had them run through their whole repertoire kind of start to finish, and it had a thing. I don't know, you know, it had a vibe. So sometimes you need to go that way. All right, one more to listen to. This one's called Your Love's Out of Reach. And this is the last track, and we're about out of time, so good timing. I was so waiting for that. I kept thinking, man, I would go Ramones on this. It was like sitting right on the edge of going Ramones, and then all of a sudden it kicked in. Not that radically different from the song that we heard right before it, in that, I mean, I'm not saying the songs are the same, but they both have kind of that indie band, garage band thing going on. And it's pretty cool. All right, I would say it could use a tad more kick drum, and it should be a roomy kick drum, just a tad. I see a lot of people talking about the vocals sound fairly reverbed, or maybe overly reverbed. Uh, I think it's fairly appropriate for this genre, which is pretty indie rock. There are all kinds of different flavors of indie rock these days, but this definitely is in line with a particular type of indie rock. I'm coming up short on thinking of any bands to compare this to, but they do tend to have this kind of faraway vocal sound, a boxy room sound, and this has it. Um, can you guys think of any bands that sound like this? I should probably, I don't have a set of listings sitting around my desk. I'd come up with one in a second. Um, but it doesn't sound overly slick, and it doesn't have that top 40 sheen to the mix. But I wouldn't want that for this kind of music. You want this to sound kind of raw, and you know what? It's lo-fi. There we go. It's the tiled toilet sound. Tiled bathroom. I don't know. I haven't tiled my actual toilet, but the bathroom, yes. No, I'm not saying it was like the Ramones. I'm just saying that there were aspects to what the Ramones did that I would have introduced to this song. It could have gone that way. Wasn't comparing it to the Ramones. Helen says the vocals reminded her of Foster the People. Indie rock doesn't necessarily mean faraway vocals. There aren't hard and fast. That's the hard thing, they're not hard and fast rules. Okay, the Killers, the Strokes, yeah. They might have a little more pop punk to them. Can I explain dynamics? Not in the time I've got left on this show. Yeah, the vocals were a pinch low. That's right, M. Collins. I probably didn't, the responsibility of communication is on the shoulders of the communicator, so I probably blew it. Um, yeah, Mike Moriello is talking about dynamics, highs and lows, but not highs and lows as in bass and treble. Highs and lows is, you're down here and then boom, you're up there. But dynamics also could mean how a compressor is affecting a guitar sound, keeping it from going into the red, or where you're compressing it a lot and keeping it very squashed so it gives it more of a sustained, pillowy sound. There's so many aspects to it. Um, Yeah, dynamics could be, how hard you're hitting a piano. Maybe there's a soft passage and you're doing little tinkly stuff on the keyboards, and then there's a big bombastic chorus. That's a change in the dynamics. Um, One final piece of advice, please. What, Kai? Need more chair? There we go. There's a little squeak for you, Keith. Difference in volume, but it could be a difference in playing. It could be a difference in the arrangement. It could be a difference in the vocal. Dynamics isn't just soft and loud. It's how do you explain dynamics? It's like saying, how do you explain red? There's so many variations of red. Um, any Tommy Dowd mixing advice? I'm not so sure that his mixing advice from back then is completely apropos to a lot of what's going on in the industry now. I wish he were still alive so that he could be taking what he knows and applying it to modern stuff. Most of his stuff was pretty organic, and he's the one that taught me about the aural landscape, looking at what you're seeing between, or what you're hearing between the speakers. As don't forget, front to back and left to right and all that stuff. All right, good. I'm glad you guys learned stuff tonight. I don't know. I didn't feel like I was giving out that much great information. Maybe I should give out, do that more often. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for watching. I've got to go because I got to go pick somebody up at the airport. But I will see you guys very soon on another exciting episode of Taxi TV. And thank you to all you brave souls who submitted your work so that we could check it out and learn from your work. And congratulations to all of you who did wonderful work, and to those of you who have a little ways to go, I hope that you learned something from the show. So we will see you soon on another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live.